How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. I'm your host Frenzy, and today I actually want to talk about a proposition or an idea that I have for KI developers to maybe consider that will benefit both the PvE community and PvP communities alike. And this is going to be related towards deck management. Now, a little bit of a TLDR. The idea is let's actually add a secondary main hand deck where during your adventures or during your PvP matches, you now have an opportunity to have two hands to work with instead of one. So obviously what we have currently is you have this little I don't know what you call this part of the board, but let's just say call this the extra board, which is technically going to be part of your main hand board. Then you have your TC board, also known as the sideboard. Well, now my proposition is going to be let's include a secondary main hand board that is going to still obey the laws that are with like the copies. Like, let's say for example I did like 2 myth shields here. Well, since I can have a total of 6 copies of these myth shields, then the secondary board, the secondary main hand board, again, I need to come up with a better name for this. The devs can be in charge of that, I guess. Well, now you can still have those 6 shields, but it's going to be on a secondary main hand that you can work around with. And that's essentially the idea that I have here. And you might be wondering, okay, well, how can I work with like 2 hands at once? Well, you could just have like a little bit of a quick command, you know, a combination key, or maybe like a control left click or something, and that will give you access to that secondary main hand you can work with, and it allows you to cycle through your decks faster. And through cycling through your decks faster, you reduce the RNG that you're going to be dealing with in the game. So that's the TLDR of the idea that I have. But before we get started, I do want to talk about as to how we got here and what made me inspired by having this idea even talked about for this video. Well, how we started was back then in the good old times of PvP. We had the concept known as mutations. Mutations take a main deck spell, and the player will have to have access to the transmute. Typically, the transmute is going to be in the form of a TC. You just happen to get some. Maybe you bought some. Maybe you just had an abundance of them just kind of sitting around. And the concept was use those 2 spells, combine them together. It works just like an enchant. And it's going to remake the spell into a new school, and it does a new effect. And it did things that wasn't possible with your general main deck spells, because it was the only concept that was out there that is willing to change how the spell works. Back then, people just kind of had a bunch of them. They kind of made them beforehand and they put them in their sideboard, or also known as the TC board. And the common thing for PvP was that the main deck, which is what you see here, right? This tends to be the utilities hand. Then it does have some hits, but most of the time it was a utilities hand. Your side deck, on the other hand, focused on having pre-enchanted hits or something like a Stormwing in this portion of the hand, but it also had a little bit of utility on this hand as well. So you had 2 things to draw from, and you had a little bit of an easier time trying to pull for the hits you need in order to do your strategies. Well, some time has passed. The developers decided, okay, we need to do away with the pre-enchanted hit system. You know, it had some uproar, yada yada yada, never really saw it again. And now we have what is known as Spell Fusion. Spell Fusion utilizes 2 cards from the main hand, and when combined together, will give it a brand new effect. It combines 2 spells, and when combined, it has the effects similar of the 2 spells. So the best example I can give for this is one I have access to right now, which is going to be the Death Humongo Frog. And with the Death Humongo Frog, or Poisonous Toad, it will do death damage when combined together. It will do death damage, and it will clear 2 heal overtimes, which is an effect that death does in order to apply 2 myth traps, which is something that myth focuses on, is traps. And that's kind of the gist of how spell fusions work. Now, there's a little bit of a problem with this. The problem with this is that a lot of players, including PvP players, usually rank their fusions based on what is the likelihood that I'm going to pack these specific cards. If one card isn't necessarily as valuable to use in the PvP setting, then chances are they're less likely to equip it for their strategies on their main deck. And if both of them are not ideal to be used for a PvP setting, then chances are, they're not going to pack either of them. And for PvE players, well, they don't really care because, again, damage is supreme in PvE. So we have a little bit of an issue, right? We have a little bit of an issue that basically having concepts like this really makes deck management harder to do, because even if the fusion can be somewhat appealing when combined together, it's the fact that you have to deal with the deck RNG in order to perform said strategy. It becomes a lot more unreliable than it should be. And it's a risk that players can take, but a lot of times they don't really want to take it because it just really isn't as reliable. So now you need to think to yourself, how can we make it more reliable? And that's the concept that I have here. Now we have the shadow spells being remade as well. Now I'm not going to go too much in detail about the remake because I don't know much about it. We will know more once we get test room up and running for Darkmoor, and I will be testing it in order to have a little bit of a better analysis for it. However, there is a friend of the stream, friend of the channel, Zayfa, who has gone over the changes, at least the stuff that was teased, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. But the gist I got of the concept is it's going to work very similarly to Shadow fusion, like in the sense of a Shadow fusion. It will work very similarly to spell fusions, except now it's shadow magic involved. And for what I've seen so far, it's been primarily just what we had as shadow enhanced hits being remade into non-shadow enhanced hit version, but you can fuse it to make it shadow enhanced once more. And that's kind of the gist that I got from this. But even though these can be useful, there are two glaring problems with the shadow fusion concept. Number one, it's the elephant in the room, shadow rating. Again, very RNG. We don't necessarily know 100% as to how the rating tends to work. What is the likelihood of you getting shadow pips from that point? And it becomes unreliable because it's way too much RNG to rely on in order to rely on your shadow enhanced hits. Even if you were to get one, chances are the spells that don't require a shadow pip are good enough on their own, if not better a lot of the time, that you don't really need the shadow enhanced hits. And most players don't. Players did complain about the changes of the shadow magic that I saw when it initially was teased, but again, you have spells like Orthoris, you have spells like Drop Bear Fury, spells alike like these, where they do exactly what you want, and there's no need for you to rely on shadow pips or shadow enhanced hits for that matter. The second issue is, again, deck RNG, because now you have to run bigger decks to potentially even be able to have the ability to utilize this new remake of the game systems. And again, just like for a PvP player, for a PvE player, it just isn't great because, again, it's an efficiency thing and it just becomes really inefficient and it's just not ideal. So a lot of the devs have been adamant about a 7 spell deck, and the reason why 7 spell decks are very popular is because, well, it's efficiency. You get what you need within the round 1 and then just go from there. Some players may run 8 or 9 spells, but then you run with the risk of the RNG being against you and you're forced to discard something that you may have wanted to use a little bit later. Like, let's say it had to be a hit with an enchant. You discard the hit or the enchant, making one spell or the other spell practically useless if it's over the 7 spells. And it's just a whole can of worms that is really annoying to deal with, kind of forcing you to reshuffle everything you know the jazz. But this concept that I have is going to help both communities. And the idea that I have is essentially, why not just have a added on main deck slot where in combat you can now deal with 2 main hands at the same time. What do I mean by this? Well, we have what is known as the extra spell hand here, which will be counted towards your main hand. You have your main hand here. You have your TC here. Well, now I'm asking for a secondary main hand you can work with. So the way it will work is you will have, within your first round, the 7 spells that you decide to pick, right? Then you can use a toggle. Let's say it was control left click to toggle from your first main hand to your secondary main hand. Well, now you do the toggle, and then you'll have your second set of spells that you want to use for your main hand. You can discard them and use them to draw TC for either of them, and it will be 2 separate decks that you're working with simultaneously. So with that, it will make you cycle through your hand much quicker, and if you have more efficiency in being able to cycle quicker, then you should be able to reduce a lot of the deck RNG you would normally have. It makes things at least a little bit better. It doesn't 100% solve the issue, but it makes things work a bit smoother. So you might be asking, why not just have TCs? Because that's kind of the point of TCs, right? Well, there's a bit of a problem with TCs. Obviously, not every spell is available through vendors, and some might require some farming methods that are with mediocre drop rates that you don't really want to deal with. That's the first issue. The secondary issue is that the spell combination mechanic requires main deck spells rather than TCs, so that's the other elephant in the room when it comes towards having TCs be the solution to all these issues. When it comes for you, for example, in order to customize your main and secondary main decks, the way it will work is like this. So let's say I had Tower Shield, right? I put 2 Tower Shields on the main deck here, just in case, right? Notice how I have 2 open slots here? Well, it will work the same way for your secondary main hand. Pretend that this had a maxed copy of 4, for example, and I'll show you a picture on screen as to how it works in a little bit of a better detail. But essentially, I can decide to put 2 more Tower Shields on the secondary main hand, but I can't do any more. And the reason that I have this concept is because the last thing you need is for a player to equip like 5 Volcanic Shields on one hand, and then they can equip another set of 5 Volcanic Shields on the other hand. Like, that's just way too much. Like, that's literally just setting at that point, and it's something that you may just want to avoid. So the main hand deck and secondary hand deck share the open slots together. The only thing that the secondary hand deck does is that it allows you to focus on a specific build on one hand with a different specific build on another. Let's say your main deck focuses more on hits. It's the same concept that we did with First Age with the TC portion of it with pre-enchanted hits. You know, your first deck is going to focus on primarily hits, but it does have access to some utility. Your secondary hand can focus primarily on utility, but it has some hits to rely on as well. And that is the gist of how the secondary hand concept is going to work. Now, because of this, and because you are able to draw from 2 different main hand decks, I would say increase the time limit to cast a spell from 30 seconds to 45 seconds, and that can be adjusted based on player feedback. I will also say that the secondary hand mechanic should have its own tutorial with Diego alongside the Selenopolis tutorial and the Magic Wheel. And this should be a concept that's introduced starting at Arc 2. So once you finish with Dragonspire, you get access to the tutorial, same like you would for Selenopolis. You'll get access to the tutorial for the secondary hand mechanic that's going to be implemented to the game. Now, this will benefit PvP players a lot because they get to cycle much quicker than they did before. Now, how will this benefit the average or casual player? Well, let me show you. Let's say you actually really wanted to use spell fusions, for example. Even if you didn't want to, what this will mean in short is that you're just able to set up your hits so much quicker, because now you can focus on one of your hands being primarily hits, and then the secondary hand will just primarily focus on the utilities that you need in order to set up for hits. It's that simple. But let's say you just wanted to actually try out spell fusions for the first time. You know, we're gonna go back to the example of the Grim Toad, right? So this requires you to have both a Homungo Frog and a Skeletal Pirate. Let's say you're going against a boss that does a bunch of heal overtime spam, and you just kind of want to get rid of it. Well, luckily, Poisonous Toad is an AoE spell, and you want to deal with both the boss and the minion. But you may want to do a combo where you just finish off the boss right then and there within the following rounds. Alright, let's do Poisonous Toad. So what we need first is a Homungo Frog and a Skeletal Pirate. And he has a bunch of heal overtime so you can remove to add traps to the boss. Pretty simple. Alright, so my main deck is going to have both the Skeletal Pirate and Homungo Frog. This is keeping it with 7 pips, 7 spell deck basically. And let's say I want to use Magnify. You know, this will be my 7th spell. And I do have some utility that I can use here, but I can also decide to just kind of remove the utility here and just add another secondary hit just in case. So I combine the 2 spells, I get the Grim Toad, and the first thing I do is I just Blade up here. Alright, cool, we're good. Then I go and toggle towards my secondary deck because I'm kind of done with the main deck for the most part. And now I go ahead and use the Grim Toad. And now what I want to do is I want to simply just deal with the boss that is spamming heal overtimes. Well, let's say that boss decided to, after you defeat the minion, it starts to spam Jujus on you. Well, what is the best way for me to counteract this mechanic? Let's use a spell that is going to remove weaknesses for me before I even do the hit, and then combo with this. So I decided to use King Artorias. And I added some extra blades just in case to make the spell a lot more powerful. And because I used the Spirit Blades beforehand, well, I still have access to those Myth Blades from there. So I decided to set up for the King Artorias. And I added a Troll here because it has a double detonate if I remove a shield from myself. And it's useful because King Artorias also has a double deferred dot, where it doesn't do its damage until after 5 rounds. Or I could just detonate it earlier on. And with removal of the Juju spams, I can put even more traps to make the spell do a lot more damage once it's time. So I decided to go for a shield, that way I can set up for the troll. I have enough pips, so I decided to go for the King Artorias, very buffed up, and now we just have to wait and see for the following round. Go for the troll, it does so much damage, essentially just one-shots the boss with the 2 double detonates. And now I had a much easier time going through this boss that had some annoying cheats, because now I am working with 2 different main hand decks. And these will also share the same TCs. So on the TCs, let's say if the plan didn't really work, well, I could just reshuffle it and then I get all the spells back of my 2 7-hand decks, 7 spell hand decks. So what I'm suggesting is with this system, we will have, instead of the 7 spell hand decks, we will now have the 14 spell hand decks. So you have much more to work with. And if you wanted to make the deck size a little bit bigger, well, at the very least, you can cycle through what you need much quicker. So this is the concept that I have. Now, I hope that it was understandable for people. I'll have some visuals to assist with my explanations, but with that being said, I'm going to be leaving off the video here. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like, share the video with your friends, share with the developers, it'd be great. And subscribe, join the Frenzy Familia, we will love to have you here. As always, to everyone who is watching, remember to stay frenzy, and peace.